The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to, I think this is our third webinar of the Biomimicry workshop series. This is Mila, and I'm going to turn it over to Marie in just a second. I just wanted to just give you one reminder. Marie's given us lots of documents, and so just a reminder again, if you need to access any of those or if you can't find them, you can find them on our website, www.peakstoprairies.org, and then on the left-hand bar, you'll see a webinar button, and you can go there to find all of the documents. And I think that some of the things that Marie sent recently are listed under Class 4. So they all should be, for the most part, organized by class. And then at the very top of the listing, there's a workshop syllabus. So that will help you kind of navigate what those documents are if you need to. Other than that, I just wanted to wish you all a happy first day of summer, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Marie. Okay, Marie, we're ready for you. I don't know where she went. I was just talking to her. Let's see.
I am muted.
Oh, okay. No, it didn't show that you're muted, Marie, but
I'm unmuted.
but then I just did it again, and now you're unmuted. So now we hear you.
All right, great.
Yep.
Well, good morning. This is our webinar number 4. We're going through the biomimicry methodology. And let me go through the agenda with you. So first thing on the agenda is we're going to talk about the intent of the class. So we're going to get to know Nestle Torres. She's a student intern, and she will present herself and outline her role in the class. We're going to get to know challenge teams number 3 and 4. And when I call on you to present, just raise your hand, whichever member of the team is going to present, and Milo will unmute you. Then we're going to have a short go-around to hear an individual story from each challenge team. Again, raise your hand, and Milo will unmute you for that. We're going to learn how to translate the biological mechanisms that you find and that Nestle helps you find in the scientific literature. And we're going to learn how to translate those mechanisms into design principles. And we're also going to learn how nature grows food today as part of our case studies. We'll go through the July homework and then have any questions or comments. So let me turn it over to Nestle.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Nestle. I am here this summer to help everyone out with their research. I understand each group has a certain question that they're assigned, and I am here. I believe that Marie sent out paper with all my contact information, and I would like to get a hold of and contact each group individually to discuss their topic and discuss any questions that you might have. So I'm from El Paso, and I am an environmental geology major, and that's it.
Okay, and thanks, Nestle. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Nestle, I haven't sent out the information. I'll send it out right after the webinar. So I'm going to encourage each challenge team to contact Nestle and set up a meeting with her. She's here until August 17th, and she has time to really dive deep into the biological literature and ask nature to find scientific information about how nature performs the function that you've identified. So how about challenge team number 3? Would someone from that challenge team, the communicate team, raise your hand, and Mila will turn the microphone over to you.
Okay, I see John Brank, your hand is raised, so I've unmuted you.
Hi, Mila.
Gotcha. We hear you. Hi, John.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be introducing our team today, and perhaps Deirdre Hanners has the most enviable job in some respects, but in other respects it has some unenviable aspects. But she works in Grand Canyon National Park and does a lot of the park's regulatory and sustainability work, and our team project is actually focusing on an activity related to park sustainability. So that's an exciting part of what we're working on. Deirdre has a master's in environmental policy from the University of Denver and studied history at Humboldt State University in California. She and I share many of the same heroes, and they are certainly lions of the environmental movement historically. So she's also a sports fan and like the rest of us, a biomimicry fan as well. Next slide. I work in the pollution prevention and toxics unit, where we do sustainability work in the form of Marie's activities with federal land managing agencies. We also do pollution prevention, recycling, and some regulatory programs, including the TRI program, Toxics Release Inventory, and a couple of TSCA programs that regulate lead and PCBs. I love working in that area, and the folks I work with, including some on the phone, many on the phone, are my inspiration and the reason that I still like to get up in the morning and come to the office. As an undergraduate, I studied biology at Washington University in St. Louis, and later on did a master's in forest science degree at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale. To have fun, I enjoy running, gardening, cooking, and of course eating, and getting out to see the world. Next picture, please. Aurora is another member of our team who has an idyllic place to work. She's a natural resource specialist at the Maroon Bells area in the vicinity of Aspen, Colorado. Beautiful place, one of the most photogenic places in Colorado, if not the whole United States. And she's very interested in incorporating sustainable practices, including renewable energy on Forest Service land. Aurora has a bachelor's degree in foreign policy from American University in Washington, D.C., and a master's in environmental policy and sustainable design, also from American University. For fun, she hikes, bikes, runs, does interior design work, and enjoys food policy, which I think also probably encompasses enjoying food as well. Next in line is Greg Varhola. Greg is a professional graphic designer, does both print and web work, and has clients in the corporate, nonprofit, government, and small business sectors. He also has as a major part of his advocation the co-hosting of a Bioneers salon in the Boulder area, where people get together every month to talk about environmental and other sustainability subjects, and also enjoy good food. Food seems to be kind of a common theme in this group. Greg has a degree in fine arts and graphic design from Indiana University, and is knowledgeable in not only that, but also science and engineering and art and music as well. So he's a true Renaissance person. Next, please. Diana works in EPA's Montana office, where, among other things, she does children's environmental health work. She also has many other interests and roles, including the family to raise, lots of pets, and a fantastic array of the recreational opportunities that are available to people who are fortunate enough to live in Montana. Diana has a degree in environmental studies from Macalester College, and earned a master's in public health from the School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Coming up next is Christina Alto. Christina is working at the Resource Conservation Center in Boulder, Colorado, which is a fantastic organization that has a resource materials reuse operation, as well as doing work in environmental, or in, energy efficiency practices. And at the moment, Christina's working on water conservation and water efficiency. Her job takes her out into the field quite a bit, and deals a lot with the public, which ties in really well with our theme of being interested in how nature communicates sustainability. For recreation, Christina enjoys hiking and camping and climbing and gardening, and she's also studying permaculture, as is Marie. Christina worked for EPA as a summer intern at one time, and did very good work, excellent work here, and distinguished herself, and is making good use of her bachelor's degree from CU in environmental policy and energy and sustainability. She has a certificate in sustainability from CU, and is working on getting a certificate in permaculture design as well. So I think that covers all of us, if I'm not mistaken. So it's back to you.
Okay, thanks, John. And would somebody from the adapters group raise your hand, and Mila will turn the microphone over to you.
Okay, Margo, I see, has raised her hand. So I'm going to unmute you, Margo. Can you?
Okay, this is Margo. Can you hear me?
Great. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So Sarah Dahl was supposed to present, but she is unable to connect at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival. So I'll run us through our slides. So we just did a group shot. Well, there's a picture of Lynn and I at the end. So from left to right, Sarah Dawn, Kirk, Laura, Lynn, and Margo. And so Sarah Dawn is working at CU at the Environmental Center, and is working with the students there in student collaboration and exploring innovation as it relates to sustainability. Does a lot of work with Colorado Pioneers and various other events that are hosted by the Environmental Center at the university, and she got a BA. there. And volunteering, there's volunteering community events, hence for being at the Prairies Bluegrass Festival. Running with dogs, mountain practicing performance, gardening with well, I'm not sure which one that is. But, and then bluegrass. Okay, next. So Kirk is at the he's got a degree in chemical environmental engineering from Montana State, and has been doing environmental engineering for 30 years in various programs. And he's interested in sustainability and climate change, and enjoys human biking. And I have a daughter that is finished her first year with Montana State Legislature, and is interested in how biomimicry can be used in terms of helping humanity and learning to live in harmony with what we have found in these delicate plants. Next. So Laura is formerly educated as a mechanical engineer and is currently at the EPA and has worked as various agencies and environmental nonprofits as a medical official, and now specializes in pollution prevention, sustainable development, climate change, and is now the climate change coordinator at EPA. Next. Next slide, please. Okay, so Lynn is a naturalist with the City of Boulder Open Space and Mountain Park, and through that she provides people experiences of getting more familiar with nature, learning, and her passion to inspire students to protect the land and hope the biomimicry can help us continue that. So she feels that biomimicry could really help more with people orienting towards working with the environment in order to survive as a species and to allow everyone else to thrive. She's been studying and practicing clean energy work for the past 6 years, and that helps her broaden her perspective beyond the realm of science. And my favorite childhood memory is lifting soggy worms off the wet pavement to rescue them from being run over. Next. A picture of Lynn and I in Australia, which we did a few years ago. So I'm Margo, and I did a undergrad in psychology and environmental science back when everybody really scratched their head about that, more and more that we are connected, and we're connected in terms of our brains as well. So that's my interest area. But I've been working as a mediator and a facilitator for a bunch of years after I got a degree in environmental policy from the University of Michigan, and worked on international projects and national environmental type facilitation projects, and now I'm working at the City of Boulder in their mediation program. And I've got my own goal to do more with this idea of how a healthy brain is ultimate key to how we can live better as a species with the entire time. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks to both of those teams.
Okay, thank you. Let me just say one thing. If you, there was a bit of feedback on that, and I think that the quality of the sound comes in better when you call in on the phone line. So if you anticipate talking during the rest of the presentation, if you're going to be presenting your story, then it may be better for you to switch your audio to the telephone option just for, the next 15 minutes or something. So you should, within this webinar, be able to under the audio button, switch to telephone, and there's a dial-in number and access code there. And then once you've told your story, if you intend to be the presenter, you should be able to switch back to mic and speakers. So that just might help the call quality. Okay, go ahead, Marie.
Okay, thank you, Mila. So for the homework for June, you were asked to really think about a story about your case study, that your challenge that you're working on. And the purpose of this is that when you're communicating some information, especially scientific information, to people, it's always good to tell a story because it engages people's emotions as well as their intellect. And so by assigning this to your team, I wanted you to start documenting the interesting or quirky little things that have brought you to your challenge, whether they resulted in dead ends and you had to turn around, or it was a really successful approach, or just an interesting anecdote that would keep the audience focused. So when you write your case study at the end of the biomimicry workshop, you have a really engaging story to tell someone. So I'm going to call on one person from each team, and I'm going to call on the communication team first because they wanted to present some new information about their function. So would somebody from the communication team raise your hand, and Mila will turn the microphone over to you.
Okay, back over to John. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. This slide, I think, makes us look better than we felt we were when we started out. Our story is about the effort of communicating within and among the team about how to define this challenge. And we found it to be very appropriate to call it a challenge because it is very challenging indeed. Getting to know one another and learning about general biology was the fun part of this challenge, but the most challenging and difficult part has been the task of defining the nature and scope of the design problem we wanted to address. We started out saying, how does nature communicate? How does nature communicate about sustainability? And we began by agreeing that the best way to address this challenge was to identify a discrete problem and solve it through biomimicry. We chose to address that by looking at the 2,500 residents in Grand Canyon National Park who aren't recycling enough, and looking at the fact that too much recyclable material is being sent to the landfill and that this wastes resources and money. We went through the methodology to identify the challenge and came up with a possible design. But the problem was that our design not only addressed communication but also increasing the recycling rate. So in effect we had two challenges we were trying to deal with, and we started to feel as though we were kind of going around in circles and down the rabbit hole of convoluted and repetitive and confusing circular questions. Marie helped us out a lot, though, when she agreed to join us on one of our conference calls and coached us through a much clearer formulation of the design challenge that we wanted to tackle. And it boiled down to simply what you see on the slide. How does nature create communities? And we ask, how does nature create communities that sustain themselves, or that behave in ways that sustain themselves? And through our exploration of the answers to this question, we hope we'll discover some ways to propagate more sustainable behaviors in Grand Canyon National Park and beyond. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, John, thanks so much. We're looking forward to the results of your study. How about the adapters? Would someone raise your hand?
Okay, here's Margo. So we'll see if we have a little bit less feedback this time, Margo. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll get on the phone.
Oh, that sounds a lot better.
How is better? Okay.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hang on a second here. We're doing stories, right?
Yes. What is your story about?
You know what, Margo, there's still quite a bit of feedback, so maybe we should go on to the next person and you can call in next time around.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll be next.
Okay. All right, I'll mute you.
Okay, well, let's go to the organized team. Would someone raise your hand from the organized team, and Mila will turn it over to you.
Okay, Elsa. Oh, I think we had this problem before with Elsa's line, where the computer is telling me that she needs to enter an audio pin, but I think, if I remember correctly, she said last time around she did enter an audio pin and it still wasn't working. So maybe, because it isn't allowing me to unmute you, unfortunately. So I guess I would suggest for Elsa maybe trying to call back in again. Oh, no, now I see that you're on speaker. Okay, I'm going to unmute you, see if this works. Okay, you there?
I'm here.
Okay, we have a lot of feedback. Try saying one more thing.
That was probably because I had the phone on at the same time, because I was thinking, okay,
Excellent.
I'll call in using the phone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now it's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so we had, it sounds like a similar experience to Team Communicate. It's very difficult to communicate, and we perceive that as difficulty organizing, of course, because that is our challenge. And we have also redefined our challenge and tried to narrow things down. And so when we were asked to write the story of our process so far, we, and Marie, do you have that slide?
I did not get a slide from, oh wait, no, I did not get a slide.
You didn't get the slide with our storybook? Ah, okay.
Sorry, I did get it, yeah.
Oh, okay. So our story, we did a storybook with pictures because I had heard a famous director saying that there are just 3 key components to any good story. And first of all, you need a hero, and the first part of the story is the hero finds themselves up a tree, and the next part of the story is the situation gets worse and people are throwing rocks up the tree and there's a bear climbing the tree, all kinds of disasters. And that the story should end with the person getting down the tree. And so we realized that we are still in the trees. So our story has obviously not unfolded yet. And we've talked about one of the key things that we realized early on is that we've been looking at various organisms in nature, but we're talking about primarily how human systems would organize. And we realized that we needed to start looking at ourselves as part of nature and what's our history of organizing as a culture and as an organism. So we talked about everything from military operations to quilting circles to permaculture and the different layers of the forest to bee colonies and ant colonies. And we're fortunate that 3 of our members, we do live in the Boulder area, but I think the difficulty that we've had is Rochelle isn't local, and so we've had some of those difficulties communicating and or really feeling that we can't allow her to have or enable her to have equal communication because of the distance and those kind of things. The other thing that we all realized is that we've had each of us have had a number of personal things that kind of come in between us and the process and then also play back into the process, and started to look at the life principles as just a frame of reference for living every day. And that makes it exceedingly complicated, because how do you integrate all of these life principles into everything that you do and everything that you say and everything that you think. And that's why we feel that we're up in the trees, because we don't know how we're going to do that.
Okay, thank you. Elsa, how about the H2O team?
Okay, well, that would be me, I think, because I don't think that we have the luxury of having an actual fiction writer on our team, which is awesome, but she unfortunately isn't here today. So, but what we did is, and did you get a slide, Marie? I've been a little bit out of the loop in the last week or so, but
I don't have a slide in.
Okay.
You didn't ask for one, so that's okay.
Okay. Well, we just wrote, kind of collectively wrote a little paragraph. So I think we can relate to everything that has been said so far with everyone. So we just wrote up a little paragraph here that I guess I'll just go ahead and read. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. Team H2O, we're fluid. We hope to approximate Webster's definition number 2, smooth and graceful in a way that screams relaxed. With our variety of backgrounds and philosophies, however, we may be closer to unstable and likely to change. Still, we work as a team and have lively discussions around our chosen resource, water. We've noted that the fluidity of water is based on physical principles of molecules flowing freely with no fixed shape and little resistance to outside forces. Moving water seems to require little energy besides gravity. We've discussed artesian wells, where water within strata under pressure moves to the surface without pumping. And we've considered the capillary action that lifts water to leaves of the giant redwood tree. With fluid grace, we approach the stage of looking to nature for assistance in designing a solution to our challenge. We're ready to ask how nature collects, distributes, and stores water with minimal energy use.
All right.
So we're getting there.
All right, good story. And how about Team Adapt? Can we go back to you?
And that would be, okay, there's Margo. I think that, Margo, you need to enter an audio pin if you see that in the audio section. When you dialed in on your phone, there should have been an audio pin underneath the access code. Oh, there, you got it. Okay.
Hello.
There you go.
Hey, this is Margo. Okay.
I hear you.
We didn't send a slide in either, so let me get down to what we wrote here. So we found what has been really interesting is just having a really varied group, different backgrounds and interests, and you know, we started out with this bigger picture of how do front-range species adapt to seasonal change in climate and inform technologies and contribute to problem solving, and how can we interpret these for the human visitor. And so we're struggling not only to use biomimicry to inform human adaptation to climate change for infrastructure and other human kinds of sort of living kind of, you know, things that are needed for living, but we also are finding the need to look at human interrelationships and behaviors, that these are pretty key to being able to do the decision making that we're going to need to be able to adapt to climate change. And so we want to weave this in as well to how to communicate. You know, our intent has always been to develop some materials that we can use to communicate this ability to adapt to open space visitors here in Boulder. And we found also the importance of this word thrive. We found that it just feels like we want to get a step beyond surviving the change and We also found we liked words like collaboration and incorporating diversity, decentralizing resilience, maintaining awareness of changing conditions, and decision-making that is responsive to maintaining a healthy ecological context. So we're finding that there's just a lot of kind of interactive, human interactive components that are important that we can hopefully draw from nature on. And, you know, Maria talked about on the last call about kind of the need to really look at, keep the word adapt as opposed to thrive. So we're kind of looking at that and how we can be looking at adapt well and adapt successfully as a way to address that idea of thriving. Let's see. So, you know, again, back to this idea that the inability so far of current human culture to deal effectively with the issues of climate change gives rise to thoughts about how human thinking and interactions needs to change. And humans need to learn how to get beyond dualistic approaches, egotistical behavior, and learn to coexist. So we are just seeing as a group how everything's going to fall out in terms of finding examples from nature that are very direct around adapting and also be able to address this kind of human behavior component. That's where we're at.
Well, thanks for that update. That sounds great. Let's move on. Those are good stories, and I would encourage you, each of your teams, is to make some notes about the problems and how you overcome your challenges and barriers in getting to your results and your solution. They'll make for a more colorful case study when you're finished. So let's talk briefly about Eyesight. So you have been asked to visit your Eyesight at least once a week to practice your observation skills. And in between, it's up to you to discover ways to find time to practice these skills. I found myself, once I got into the practice of observing, is to really, when I'm walking in the woods or in parts of nature, is I can easily recognize how nature is demonstrating life's principles because I start looking through that lens. Now and it brings much more enjoyment to me than just saying that's a pretty flower. So it's worth really noting how your experiences with this exercise change over time. And so think about jotting down in your journal what aspects of the practice of Eyesight that you enjoy or the ones that you find challenging. And it's likely at the end of the biomimicry workshop, you'll really be a more fabulous observer, especially of nature, and you'll actively look for Eyesight's opportunities everywhere. And, you know, this theme of this webinar is really around food. It sounds like food's on everyone's mind. And a lot has been happening since since summer started. I do most of my Eyesight work at my garden, and I hope that all of you have been visiting your Eyesights and relearning how to observe nature with childlike curiosity. And we're a little behind time in the webinar, so I'm not going to call on anyone to talk about or share your Eyesight experiences this webinar, but keep that in mind, and bring your journals to the in-person session as well because we'll be doing some Eyesight work there. So continue. You have 2 new Eyesight exercises that are examples of how you could observe nature. But let's move on. So as one of the case studies that I'm going to present this webinar is a case study about how does nature grow food. And for those of you who have read Janine Benyos' book, Biomimicry, one of the first chapters in her book is asking this question, how does nature grow food? And she says, Janine says, what if we were to make agriculture using crops that had the same kind of self-sufficiency, the ability to live within their field mates, stay in sync with their surroundings, build soil beneath them, and handle pests with a bomb. What would agriculture look like? And she answers the question by saying, well, that depends on where you live. And Wes Jackson from the Land Institute thinks it would look like a prairie. Other people who live in other parts of the world think it would look like their part of the world, which is very locally attuned and responsive. So the common theme is that agriculture in an area would take its cues from the vegetation that grew there before settlement. Using human foods planted in the pattern of natural plant communities, agriculture would imitate as closely as possible the structure and function of a mature natural ecosystem. And the Land Institute has worked for over 30 years on the problem of agriculture. It was founded in 1976 in Salina, Kansas. The Land Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit research and educational organization, and it's funded by charitable contributions. And it was interesting to find out that they get most of their money from corporate sponsors. They really don't get much money at all, if any, from government organizations. Their purpose is to develop an agricultural system with the ecological stability of the prairie and a grain yield comparable to that from annual crops. The Land Institute has researched, published in reference scientific journals, and given hundreds of presentations both here and abroad, and hosted countless intellectuals and scientists at their research station. Their work is frequently cited, most recently in Science and Nature, and in many other prestigious scientific journals. So right now they're in the process of assembling a team of advisors, which also includes members of the National Academy of Science. These scientists understand this work and stand ready to endorse the feasibility of what they have come to call natural systems agriculture. And their strategy now is to collaborate with public institutions in order to direct more research in the direction of this natural systems agriculture. And I was fortunate enough to be able to visit the Land Institute a few weeks ago and spend some time with Wes Jackson, who is the founder of the Land Institute. So here's the mission of the Land Institute. What they need to reach this goal is a conceptual change followed by practice in the way we conduct business within our ecosphere. A small goal there, right? As emerging biomimics, we are learning about how to frame this conceptual change during this deep dive into the science of biomimicry. And it will be your responsibility as biomimics to carry this change into your practice. The conceptual change necessary bundles nearly all of the problems into one and brings us to a major point that agriculture has the sole potential to lead us into a different relationship with our ecosphere. It's all about the food. So where we get our food from is extremely important. It actually is, our life depends on it. Wes Jackson, the president of the Land Institute, says, if we don't get sustainability in agriculture first, it won't happen anywhere. It won't happen in the material section, nor in the industrial sector in general. Agriculture is fundamentally ecological in nature. Agriculture has the science of ecology standing behind it, a science devoted to discovering how ecosystems work. The materials and engineering sectors do not. It won't be easy, since the dominant idea of our time, which is that nature is to be subdued or ignored, goes back 10,000 years to the beginning of agriculture. Nature's ecosystems are ancient. Remember, 3.8 billion years of evolution. These ecosystems are real economies, and they can be trusted. The material sector and the industrial sector is recent. It has no time-honored discipline to draw upon. Skyscrapers, freeways, and suburbia have been made possible due to our discovery and use of fossil carbon, not through any organizing concepts. Soils and forests have fed us, but they too are in decline, even in the subsidy of fossil fuels. The important questions have been answered and critical principles explored to the point that the Land Institute feels comfortable in saying that they have demonstrated the scientific feasibility of their proposal for a natural systems agriculture. Because this work deals with basic biological questions and principles, the implications are applicable worldwide. If natural systems agriculture were fully adopted, we could one day see the end of agricultural scientists from industrial societies that deliver ergonomic methods and technologies from their fossil fuel intensive infrastructures into developing countries, and therefore saddling them with really brittle economies. So part of the U.S. Agricultural policy is to go in and bring our fossil fuel intensive practices into third world countries, actually eliminating their more sustainable way of agriculture. And what Wes Jackson refers to this is we would be able to return to the Garden of Eden. And Wes Jackson believes that when Adam and Eve were thrown out of the Garden of Eden, it was the end of getting our food from nature and the start of working the land by the sweat of our brow. So no method for perpetuating agricultural productivity exists. So this is a photo of a no-till corn crop with flood irrigation. Runoff causes severe contamination to groundwater, surface water, and results in the loss of topsoil. The goal of the Land Institute is to improve the security of our food and fiber sources by reducing soil erosion, decreasing dependency upon petroleum and natural gas, and relieving the agriculture-related chemical contamination of our land and water. This specific research is an innovation for agriculture using nature as measure to develop mixed perennial grain crops for food for humans, where farmers use nature as a standard or measure for making their agronomic decisions. So 70% of human calories come from grains. The number one grain produced is rice, the second is wheat, and the third is corn. And these represent the largest amount of land in production. And much soil erosion is due to corn. Soil erosion in soybeans is even worse than corn, and he recommends that nobody eat soybeans. Over 70% of human calories worldwide comes from these kind of grains, but these productions erode ecological capital. And so the research of the Land Institute is directed towards the goal of conservation as a consequence of agricultural production. So as we grow our food, we would actually be restoring the land and returning it to a more natural situation. So grain became important to human development because it keeps, and fruits and vegetables are hard to keep, and they don't contain a lot of calories. If we want to solve the ag problems, we must solve the problem of grain. Lots of chemical concentrations are in how we grow fruits and vegetables, but not a lot of calories. Grains can be transported long distances. They even help us make war because they can feed the troops. He offered us an interesting fact that Native people were never defeated in a battle during the summer when food from nature was plentiful. Because the army had grains in the winter, they were able to sustain themselves when the Native people did not have enough food. The tendency of all natural ecosystems is to increase their ecological wealth. For instance, all prairies left alone recycles materials, sponsors its own fertility, runs on contemporary sunlight, and increases biodiversity. Do you see life's principles that work here? Agricultural systems tend otherwise. They erode and degrade ecological capital as they provide for human needs. We call this the problem of agriculture, introduced when our ancestors made the transition to agriculture millennia ago, about 10,000 years ago. So the Land Institute's research results suggest that it's now possible over the next 25 years to solve this 10,000-year-old problem. To grow corn for fuel, for biofuels, is another bad idea. The amount of calories in one tank of gas, about 26 gallons, is enough to feed one person for 1 year. Another example is that Annie's Organics, many of you are familiar with those products, is now facing the problem of not enough suppliers in the U.S. because many grain farmers are converting their fields to corn and soybeans due to the increased government subsidies for these crops. We sure need a new system, not just a step increase over the existing one. So this is a graph of the degree of resilience in agricultural lands. And the area under the curve represents till agricultural lands all the way up to if we tilled 100% of our ag lands. Most agricultural land is erodible. At the extreme left, where the vertical bars are long, the degree of forgiveness, and here it's called the ecological amplitude, following disruption of the original vegetative structure is illustrated. So when it has a long bar, it shows that if you disturb the vegetative structure of that land, it is more resilient. So on the extreme left, this could be river valleys such as the Kansas River Valley or the Nile in Egypt. A variety of crops can be grown, and the forgiveness of human error is large. A short vertical line in the upper right may represent a steep south-facing slope in the Intermountain West of the U.S. or the ranch lands in South Dakota. Here, one better have a vegetative structure similar to what was there originally, or there will be a loss of ecological capital. The degree of forgiveness, or the ecological amplitude, is very small, and the ability to recover from a disturbance is very low. So the Land Institute has persisted for 3 good reasons. First, it had a paradigm, almost from the first, upon which the countless facets of sustainability can be currently and conveniently positioned. And secondly, with that paradigm, they define the problem of agriculture not in the context of a patchwork approach to addressing the problems in agriculture, using our current way of producing food, with smart resource management with a smart resource management approach. Thirdly, they set out to work on a research agenda in which nature became their standard or measure rather than seeking nature to be subdued or ignored. So ecosystems are good at self-regulating, they accumulate ecological capital, and are largely resilient to most perturbations. For example, they can overcome epidemics and drought because they're buffered. They have systems that buffer those disturbances. The mission of the Land Institute has been to honor these systems and mimic them to some degree. They also have a rural community study program where they extend this thinking to human communities, working with rural communities first. So this is a photo of a perennial sorghum that's under development. At the Land Institute, they want to combine 4 to 8 species of perennial grain crops with other plants that are necessary, such as nitrogen fixers and pollinators, in a perennial grain field. The good news is that 10,000 years ago, native people took perennial grains and made them into annuals so that they would have large seed heads. The work of the Land Institute is to crossbreed by manual cross-fertilization. They do not use genetically modified organisms in their operation. So they crossbreed annual grain crops with their close perennial cousins. All grain crops we grow as annuals have a genetically related perennial plant, so it can be done. And the Land Institute selects for the features that we want in these cross-fertilizations. We want large seed heads that remain on the pod until they're harvested, and we want the perennial features such as perennialism and deep roots. And this photo on the right shows that the roots of a perennial wheat grass grow up to 30 feet into the soil. So and what happens in the case of a drought is that the vegetative structure will die off, and maybe even some of the roots near the surface will dry off. But because the roots go so deep, they're able to restore themselves after a disturbance such as a drought or a fire. On the right-hand side is the roots for an annual wheat crop, and you can see how that would not hold the soil as well. The photograph on the left shows how they got a picture of these roots. These perennial grain crops are planted in a cylinder that's inside of a cylinder, and they bury those cylinders 30 or 40 feet down so that they can pull out the cylinder and get the whole root intact so they can really study the root system. So in asking the question, how would nature grow food, the Land Institute's mission is to grow perennial grains in polycultures, which are mixtures, to get the benefits of a prairie-type ecosystem. And the question is, how can these be harvested? Well, and that question rose so frequently over the years that they finally decided to plant a polyculture of 4 annual grain crops: corn, soybeans, sorghum, and sunflowers. And the seed mixture was planted, and then they used the combine to harvest it. The progress through the field was slow, but not prohibitively slow. The seeds were then separated with a standard seed cleaner. The point is that mechanical equipment already in existence with little or fine tuning can do the job, and the larger problem are with plant development, not with engineering the equipment. So the picture on the bottom right shows a field of perennial kernza, which is a grain that they've developed. So annual plants must be sown every year, and they die at some point after reaching maturity and will not regrow. Perennial plants live for more than 1 year. They may go dormant, but will reemerge from their roots. A polyculture is when you have different species in an area, and prairies are a polyculture. They have a variety of many different plants growing interspersed, with about 80% of which are perennials that remain alive for many years, and the rest of the 20% are annuals that grow for only 1 season. Kernza is the first commercially available perennial grain that they have developed, and Kernza flour made from intermediate wheatgrass. We each got a sample, so I haven't tried it yet, but I'm looking forward to tasting it. They said it's really a lot like wheat flour, except it's very low in gluten. So you can make things like pancakes and waffles, but it's not good for making bread. So on occasion, the Land Institute makes kernza flour available to those who attend their Fall Prairie Festival, which is the end of September, if anyone is interested in going. But this kernza comes from excess experimental seed and milling trials. It's not really available yet in sufficient quantities to offer for sale at other times of the year. So a perennial seed crop is economically viable when you can produce 1,000 pounds from an acre. And kernza is one crop that has reached this baseline. As the Land Institute develops other grains to this level, they will be mixed with other non-seed producing perennial crops, such as ones that fix nitrogen, and they'll be grown in a mixed polyculture for commercial production. It's expected to take at least 25 years to achieve more than 2 or 3 profitable, productive perennial grain crops. And people ask the question, well, isn't that too late to address the problems facing the world today? And the Land Institute hopes not, but they need to move as fast as possible, because new strategies are needed that emphasize efficient nutrient use in order to lower production costs and minimize negative environmental impacts. The sooner that successful alternatives are available, the more land we can save from degradation. It is likely that global agricultural acreage will expand over the next 2 to 3 decades, especially if the human population continues to increase. Recent predictions predict an 18% or more increase in agricultural lands by 2020. And remember that graph. So we're going into agricultural lands that are minimally productive and have a low threshold for responding to disturbances. The best soils on the best landscapes have already been used for agriculture. 38% of global agricultural lands are currently designated as degraded, and the area is increasing. To minimize encroachment into non-agricultural lands in the future, currently degraded lands will need to be kept in production and restored to higher productive potential. In regions of the world where high inputs of chemical fertilizers and fuels are not an option, agricultural systems that are highly efficient, productive, and conserve natural resources are needed, and they will be needed even more 25 years from now. So how do alternative methods of production such as permaculture, biointensive farming, or organic fit in with perennial grain crops? What about fruits and vegetables? How do community-supported agricultural farms fit in? Well, the Land Institute focuses on the crops that occupy 70% of global cropland and provide about the same percentage of food calories. Annual grain crops growing primarily in monocultures. Any number of approaches, alternative or conventional, could be used in managing perennial crops and distributing the harvest. And this is not to say that efforts aimed at reducing the scale of industrial agriculture and increasing local food security are misguided. They are not. They are necessary to transform our food system over the long term. But while promoting local, small-scale organic agriculture, we must also assess how and where the bulk of our calories can best be produced. If all or even a large portion of the calories consumed by New Yorkers came from New York State, for example, there would be few trees left in the state's thin, poor soils, and their soils would be quickly degraded. The bulk of calories consumed by New Yorkers must come directly or indirectly from grain crops which grow well in the Midwest and the Great Plains states. As an example, Boulder County has an aggressive local food movement, but currently only 1% of the food consumed in the county comes from local sources, and 80% of all food consumed in Colorado comes from out of state. Wes also said that we need to talk about the ecosphere, not the biosphere. The non-bionic world gives rise to the bionic world. There are limits to biomimicry because it needs to include the non-bionic world. If we have to walk the talk, we'll never get there, he said. We need to deepen the conversation and bring this message to the choir. So words from Wes Jackson here at standing outside his natural prairie. In the foreseeable future, we will be forced to power down, reduce our numbers, and cope with rapid climate change. Receiving too little attention is our ability to keep ourselves fed during this, our most important phase of the human journey. If we are to have a soft landing, we must turn our attentions to our soils and fresh water. The longer we wait, the lower the long-term carrying capacity of the still beautiful planet will be. When it comes to agriculture, it is here we have a chance to square the food-producing part of our economy with nature's economy, the real economy that features material recycling and runs on contemporary sunlight. I believe it is here that we can begin to explore the possibilities of a different economic order, this time of the renewable variety. Of course, there is more on our plate than food if we are to be secure. Economics is about more than bookkeeping. It should be clear that we, in the industrial societies in particular, have been cooking the books to falsify the deficit spending we have imposed on our ecosphere. Perhaps a new agriculture based on the way nature's ecosystems and nature's economy have worked over millennia can point the way. So good work. The background on Wes Jackson is he got a PhD in genetics, and he had two unique experiences in nature as a young man. He lived in the Kansas prairie lands, which he learned to love, and in the summers he spent it traveling to his aunt and uncle's farm in North Dakota, and it was a ranch with native prairie lands. And so he finally got the eureka moment to combine all three of those interests and skill sets into the Land Institute. Great work. So let's move on. So in the previous two webinars, we have gone through the process of integrating biology into design methodology, and I wanted to just take a short review of the process. So we did the scoping phase. Behind the scenes, we've identified your function and context. Right now we're in the creating phase, which is really the glamorous stage. So we're really brainstorming and looking for solutions in nature. And then finally, after our in-person session, we'll be going through the evaluating phase to see the solutions we came up with and how they match up against life's principles. So there is another method to use nature as inspiration, and I wanted just to present it here real shortly. We won't be using it, but instead of integrating biology into your design, which is the methodology we're using, you can also use biology to inspire a design. And in this mechanism, we just find unique models in nature. You find something real and cool in nature and say, what can I do with this strategy or idea? Then you abstract the deep design principles, you identify potential applications, you play in design, again, integrating life's principles, and evaluating using life's principles and thanking nature. Here's an example. The design principles is that the bark of trees keeps surfaces cool by minimizing absorption of solar light and maximizing thermal emissions. A biologist identified one strategy that the tree uses to cool, so they're asking the question, how does nature cool, and has abstracted the design principles. So the tree reflects light, absorbs a specific light spectrum to create optimal conditions for temperature control. And then the designer identified some potential applications. You can have paint that keeps buildings cool, or design solar cells using some of the strategies. So although we will not use this methodology to solve our challenges, but it's used a lot in Ask Nature to show users how these natural strategies can be used to solve human problems. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. You can do the process backwards when you do find something cool in nature and think about how to bring it into a design. And also to note that humans are the only species on the planet who invents something and then figure out what to do with it. All other organisms only invent what they need. So let's continue with the integrating biology into design. So the challenge teams are now in the creating phase. So the steps we take in these phases are we biologize the question, which you've done. And that means to take a human need or function and rephrase it so that an answer might be found in biology. And we discover natural models by looking outside, by asking nature, or by asking Nestle, because she's going to be out there to help you find those strategies in the scientific research. Now we'll take this phase a step further and move into abstracting and emulating nature's genius. So abstracting design principles means that you translate the biological mechanism that you have discovered, either through observation, through Ask Nature, or through scientific literature research, and you change it into a design principle. So after you have identified an acceptable suite of possibilities by accessing biological literature, by working with Nestle and researching the biological literature as a team, or by observing nature, the most important step follows. So biology by itself is very interesting, but if you were just to hand over that biology to the design team, most designers or architects, for example, wouldn't know what to do with it. So an additional step of translation is now necessary. When you read a case study about a specific organism that performs the function that you've identified, The creating process sometimes seems easy and obvious, but the emulation of a natural strategy with a human solution requires an understanding of the biology, a translation into design principles, and then a good dose of creativity, and we call this phase abstracting. So it includes two components. First, distilling the biological method or strategy, and then secondly, translating these into design principles. And abstracting is one of the most critical components of practicing biomimicry, and it's also one of the most difficult. So reading a scientific paper does not always send the reader to the sketchbook to draw out an amazing new application. So the first stage of abstracting is often quite technical. What is the biological method of what is happening must be understood in as much detail as possible. This mechanism is the most detailed look at the natural phenomenon. Think of mechanism as how the strategy works. Strategy is how the function is achieved. The function is what nature is doing. So let me give you this example. So here's the abstracting of the electric eel. So the function, what nature is doing, is the nature is hunting prey. The strategy, which is how the function is achieved, so they hunt prey by releasing an electrical charge into the water to stun its prey. And the mechanism of how the strategy works, the eel uses an ion pump to create a charge separation across the cell membrane. Mechanisms occur on the level of shape, process, or interactions within environmental systems as a whole. Remember, the best biomimic designs mimic the form, process, and ecosystem in which the organism resides. The level of detail necessary to properly translate the mechanism into design principle varies depending on the application. But with practice, you'll begin to figure out how deep you need to go. So for the challenges identified by our challenge team, you will need to abstract the strategies from the organisms who perform your functions. Since we're not developing complex designs or products, but rather looking for innovative strategies, this deep design into the mechanism is really not required. So in this example, if your challenge was to hunt prey, you would really just go down to the strategy level. Releasing an electric charge into the water would be the strategy. You really wouldn't have to understand the mechanism in order to apply it to your challenge. So for your own knowledge and experience, take one or two of the strategies you find from nature on performing your functions and look at the mechanism nature uses to see if a deep dive into the biology helps you inform an answer for your challenge, and see if you need to dive into the mechanism. The design principle is an idea that can be emulated in a design. A mechanism can sometimes be directly copied, such as the example of the PAX fan blade motor used to mix water. So in that case, remember he found that the design principle was that you move water in an exponential spiral the way it wants to. But usually the constraints on your particular natural example will not be exactly the same as those in the project. So direct implementation seldom represents the best emulation. So consider the following opportunity. When faced with the challenge of natural ventilation in a building, prairie dogs' tunnels might provide inspiration. So despite the length of their tunnel, the shape of the tunnel and the opening helps ensure that all spaces are adequately ventilated with fresh air. So that's the function you want to achieve. A direct copying of the mechanism would take their shapes and build them into the ducts of the building. However, exactly copying their shape may not yield the best results for increased air movement of a building, since the prairie dog tunnels and openings serve multiple functions. In addition to air conditioning, these tunnels must provide a safe passage, a quick and easy entry, a perch for predatory watching, a safeguard to keep groundwater from entering the tunnel and flooding. So they're not designed exclusively for airflow. They're designed for multifunction. Multifunctional design, one of life's principles. An accurate distillation of the mechanism is important to tease out the details of how the organism's constraints and purposes are similar to those of the project. Teasing out the critical elements of the mechanism and then testing them will help determine if the natural model's effectiveness at different scales and contexts. So one organism does not always equal one design principle. Sometimes a strategy involves elements of form, process, and system. And usually one strategy meets multiple functions. And as a result, distilling and translating a mechanism can yield design principles as well. So let's look at it. So a design principle, like a function, lingers in neutral territory that does not belong exclusively to biology, engineering, business, or any other discipline. The next step of abstracting is the translation from the biological mechanism to a design principle. A design principle captures that essence of the biological strategy and translates it into such a way that it is biologically accurate but devoid of biological jargon. So if you spoke about your design principle in biological language, say to a business person, they may not understand it unless they have a really clear understanding of biology. Think of it as saying exactly the same thing, but without any obvious connection to biology. So how can a mechanism be described in a way that is useful to a designer who may know none of the scientific terms, yet not lose any of the important aspects required for a successful mechanism? The translation stage requires an understanding of all parts of the mechanism, what is happening in the natural models, plus how and why that go with the example. A trained biologist at the design table specializes in this kind of translation, but it is a skill that any dedicated practitioner of biomimicry can develop over time with concerted effort. It definitely takes practice, but a good translation leads to more effective emulation. So let's look at an example that we used at EPA. The EPA Region 8 office partnered with the Biomimicry Guild to test biomimicry as a methodology to identify innovations for reducing the most potentially harmful effects of the toxic release inventory chemicals. And for those who don't know, the toxic release inventory, or the TRI, was a law that was passed many years ago after the Bhopal incident that killed so many people with a chemical release. And what the TRI is in a nutshell is that companies who produce a specific list of chemicals and have releases to the environment must report those concentrations to EPA. That's what the law says. They just must report what's been released. And then EPA publishes that results to the public, and it has resulted in a lot of changes in practices in companies. For example, many years ago, as many as 20 years ago, Coors Brewing Company was one of the top 10 polluters of toxic release inventory chemicals in Colorado. And you can tell what that would do to their reputation, so they quickly reformulated their processes so that they would get off the list. So without any enforcement action by EPA, it has resulted in a lot of reduction in chemical releases. So biphenyl A, or BPA, which many people are familiar with as a component of plastic and plastic water bottles, was selected as the target chemical based on environmental release quantities reported to the TRI for 2008 and its status as an EPA chemical of concern. In carbonless receipts, there are 3 chemicals that are micro-encapsulated on the surface of the receipt paper: a colorless dye, a solvent, and a developer, which is the BPA. When the register key hits the paper, the micro-encapsulated chemicals mix producing a color change. And for you or I, when we receive a receipt, we don't have it hold it that long to have an impact on our health. But people who are cash register attendants rapidly absorb the EPA through the oils on their skin, and BPA is a carcinogen and an endocrine disruptor. So BPA's use as a color developer in thermal and carbonless paper was chosen as the target chemical application. So color change was the function selected for this study. A comprehensive study of the scientific literature revealed almost 24 natural strategies for color change in organisms, ranging from crab spiders that change from white to yellow, tomato hornworms that change from black to green, that can turn into almost any color combination. Color change strategies include oxidation to color organelles with individual color cells, and pigment-free layered structures that play with incoming light to produce color. And I've included both the complete report and a case study summary that includes some background information on the PRI process in your packet for this week, so you can read those if you're interested. A search of both the primary and secondary literature resulted in 21 ways that nature changes color. What was discovered was the strategies used in nature to change color. And there were 3 major types of color change strategies that emerged from this shallow dive research. So we found pigment-based color changes, pigment-free and structure-based color changes, and then a combination of pigment-based and structure changes. So this is an example. It's found in a lot of fruit and vegetables. So anthocyanins that are found in vegetables as well as flowers and fruits can be red to purple depending on the pH. And this is an example of a pigment-based color change. This fish has a distinctive reflective stripe on its head and body. The reflective stripe contains a dense layer of physiological active pores that act as a multi-layer reflectors. And so this is an example of a structural-based color change. And color and pattern changes in squid skin are mediated by the action of thousands of pigment chromophore organs in combination with a light-reflecting cell. So it's an example of a combination of structural and pigment-based color changes. So what this researcher did was look in nature, find 21 organisms that have a rapid color change, and abstracted 3 design principles of how nature produces a color change from those. So in this case, a nature-inspired alternative to BPA in thermal paper might take 1 of 2 routes. First, you could develop a non-toxic substitute for BPA while preserving the current 2-chemical encapsulation technology triggered by heat or pressure. And the shallow dive done for this project suggests melanin or other anthocyanins might be promising candidates of colorants. So the next step would be to select several of the melanin and anthocyanin strategies for more detailed studies so that we would look closer at the mechanism that the organism uses. And that's called a deep dive into the primary scientific literature. The second route was to develop a completely new technology for use as cash register receipts, luggage tags, faxes, labels, etc. So imagine a technology that requires no pigment, no color developer, and no solvent, but instead relies on modifications of the nanostructures of the substrate to create the desired pattern. In this case, the next step would be to select 1 or more of the pigment-free, structured-based strategies, like the squid and the fish, for deep dive research. The results of this deep dive would be to identify any common principle at work across strategies and taxa. Once identified, these common principles help formulate plans for biomimetic inventions and innovations to be shared with a collaborating laboratory that could develop a proof of concept prototype. So if you're interested, read the full report or the case study, and you can see more of the process of how the literature was researched and how the strategies and mechanisms were pulled out of that research. So let's talk about our homework. It's due July 13th. We want you to contact Nestle and set up a work process to work with her, and this will be ongoing. So Nestle will be with us until August 17th. Unfortunately, she will not be able to attend the in-person session, but by the end of August, you should have all of your literature review completed and your design principles abstracted from that literature. I've presented some examples and for you to practice abstracting the deep design principles from the literature workshop. And if you want to, you can read the TRI study papers, and also I've given you some Eyesight. So this month there'll be nothing that you need to submit, but just don't feel that I'm giving you a free ride. This is really time for you and your team to start really pulling that the strategies out of that literature. I wanted, since abstracting is so difficult, I wanted to go over one example with you that's not on your abstracting sheet. So these kind of beetles, I'm not even going to try to say their name, they achieve a really striking white color. They live on a white fungus. So in order not to be eaten, they have to blend in. So they use the white as a camouflage. And they're able to achieve their striking white coloration not through chemical pigments, but through a disordered tangle of these small diameter filaments in their scales. So they're using a structural way to exhibit color. The fibers are sparsely packed with just the right number of voids, giving rise to a thorough scattering of light that causes the brilliant white. The secret is not in the material itself, but in the structure, the way the meshwork of fibers and voids scatter the light. And unlike colors, which can be created by using highly ordered structures to scatter light, white is created by a random, simultaneously scattering of light. So in this case, the function, what nature is doing, is to create white color. The strategy, which is how the function is achieved, the white is achieved through structure. The beetles create brilliant white color structurally with their ultra-thin scales that contain sparsely packed fibers with voids that cause light to scatter. So the design principle, which is biology translated into design language, would be something like microscopic, ultra-thin, interconnected filaments simultaneously scatter light to create brilliant white. So that would be a design principle that you could give an inventor or a designer to develop a prototype. In contrast, common synthetic and natural structures such as human teeth or bleached paper can require 100 times greater thickness to achieve the same results. So the beetle's whitening effect is accomplished without benzene rings and in a fully biodegradable and common material, which is chitin. Mimicking this physical effect in any kind of coating or additive holds great promise for a number of applications to reduce the toxic chemicals or reduce energy consumption. And we can also look at how the life principles apply to this example. So the organism is fitting forms to the function it wants to achieve, and it's using a multifunctional design because it's producing the color and it's also protecting itself. So I'll ask now if anyone has any questions concerning the homework or concerning abstracting. Milo, I'll turn it over to you to see if anyone raises their hand.
Okay, well, I have one question. that was submitted. Sorry, just a second. Okay. One question that was submitted by Margo. She's wondering, are you using design principle and deep principle interchangeably on the abstract worksheet?
Yes. Yes. The design principle and the deep principle is pretty much the same.
Okay, great. Another question is whether you can repeat the design principle that you just mentioned, abstracted from the beetle.
Okay, let me go back. So the design principle, which is the biology translated into design language, and this is what we would say. So let me repeat it. So the strategy, which is how the function is achieved, so this is telling the design principle in biological language. So what we found from this is that white is achieved through structure. The beetles create brilliant white color structurally with their ultra-thin scales that contain sparsely packed fibers with voids that cause light to scatter. And so a design principle that we would give a designer, translating the biology into design language, would be something like microscopic, ultra-thin, interconnected filaments simultaneously scatter light to create brilliant white.
Okay, that's a mouthful. That sounds really good, though.
Well, and play around with it. For me, when I went through the abstracting in my case, in my work I did, it was hard because I'm not a designer, and I'm used to getting the design principles as a civil engineer. People just say, build this, and here's the parameters. But if you're the example I gave quite a few webinars ago of the ConocoPhillips site here in Boulder County, where the Biomimicry Guild used the concept of the prairie dog tunneling to cool those buildings. That idea was put into the design specs for those buildings, but the architects and engineers who were working on that building were unable to take the biology and translate it. They were unable to invent a cooling system using those strategies. So it's a really critical way to make that translation. And again, because we're not producing products, it's not as difficult. And if you'll remember last webinar, I gave an example of design principles for water, the strategies that nature uses to collect, store, distribute, and use and clean water. So those strategies were translated from the biology into just design principles. Any other questions?
I think we've got one more, a couple more questions, Marie.
Okay.
Mary was wondering if you can speak more about what West Jackson and the Land Institute are doing or sharing in rural communities. And can you remind us where they're located?
Okay, and what I would encourage you is to get on their webpage. There's an enormous amount of information on their webpage. And they have a Prairie Festival. It's the last weekend of September. And so far, every September, I seem to be busy that particular weekend. But I intend to go this year. So you can go to the Institute and visit the facility, and they have a lot of different speakers and information about their rural community. One of the things that is happening is that people who have grown up in rural communities, such as myself, I grew up in a rural farming community, and I realized that community life is dying. It's no longer available to people. It's been overtaken not only by commercial agriculture, but by organizations like Walmart that come in and destroy the local economy. so in order to really bring back the whole idea of using nature as a model for agriculture, we also need to restore the rural agricultural system so that people enjoy living in those communities. And when I asked Wes about that, he said that he would want to restore those rural communities, but without all of the sweat of the brow, because if you plant perennial grain crops, a lot of the heavy work that makes farming undesirable to people would be eliminated or greatly reduced. So I would encourage you to get on their webpage and learn more about their Rural Communities program.
Great.
Other
Okay.
questions?
Yep. Just one more question from John. So I'm going to unmute him because he's raising his hand.
Okay.
Go ahead, John.
This is really more a comment than a question, and that is that, Marie, the table or matrix that you and Nestle prepared for the Netherlands stormwater case, I thought did a really nice job of conceptualizing some of the things you were talking about today, and would encourage you to share that at some appropriate time with their groups, because it, to me, it really helped crystallize that task of making the connection to the design principles. I could get it then.
Okay. What I did for that, let me just briefly fill people in on that project. The town of Nederland is a small town of 1,400 people that is, I think it's at 8,000 feet altitude here in just within Boulder County, and they have a big problem with their stormwater. They live in a bowl surrounded by their watershed, and last year they got 11 inches of rain in 4 hours. So they got half of their annual rainfall in a very short time, and of course they had an enormous amount of flooding. And so in order to solve their stormwater problem, they want to look at nature. What is the natural system that water really wants to do, instead of just building concrete storm drains as what we normally do. And so we developed a spreadsheet of the strategies that nature uses to collect, store, distribute, use, and clean water using life's principles. And I'll put that out there along with the communication sheet for Nestle to communicate with Nestle. I'll put that in an email after this webinar. And I was reluctant to do it because it's somewhat of a cheat sheet for the team H2O, but I'll just give them that heads up. But I would encourage you to still go through the biological literature so that you understand the methodology and the process for doing that. And the way that was developed was to look at how does nature perform those functions, and how to take the strategies that nature uses to perform the function of collecting water, distributing water, using water, cleaning water, and convert them into design principles that and match them up with life's principles. So I will publish that. I'll send it to you in email. Good point, John. Other questions or comments?
One other question is whether Wes Jackson had anything to say, or whether he was involved with the Farm Bill.
Okay, this is really interesting because someone did ask him that question when we were down there. And what Wes Jackson has done, and I believe it's also it is on their webpage, is he wrote a 50-year farm bill and submitted it to the government. And the 50-year farm bill was laid out in 5-year, I think 10 5-year increments to say how the government could change their policies over the next 50 years to promote and actually put in effect perennial grain producing and support perennial grain production. And that every 5 years it would institute new policies and procedures and direct funds into the next step to convert our grain production into perennial grains. So he shared a little bit with us when we were there, but I would encourage you to get on his web page and to look at the 50-year farm bill he submitted. And the interesting part was that he never got any response from the government on that 50-year farm bill, no comment, and that all of his funding comes from philanthropists who want to see his dream and vision implemented. It doesn't come from the farm, USDA, or from government assistance. So we need to write, well, I can't say anything political. So you do with it what you want, but it's out there, and look at it. It's a very interesting way to approach the problem.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Marie. That's all the questions.
All righty. Well, we'll end a few minutes early, and thanks everybody for your time and attention. And send me an email or give me a call if you have any questions. And I really encourage you. Nestle's available. She's an excellent researcher. She's provided some really good detailed research on our helping to prepare a proposal for the Netherlands stormwater project. So she's got those good research skills, and let's put her to use. And she'll also be working with the teams in the logistics for the in-person session in September. So I will say fare thee well, and go have some food.
Thank you, Marie. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.